Time for another episode of The Thought Project, just so you know.
Pump up the volume.
Yep.
Pump up the volume.
It's a really slow starting song, isn't it, actually? It takes a while to build. It's Pump Up the Volume by Mars. It's from the long time, like the 80s. How do you even dance to the song?
Pump up the volume. 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 Pump up the volume.
Okay, that's enough of that song. That was the old 80s hit Pump Up the Volume. Such an old song. I got my Hello Kitty hat, too. So today's episode is going to be going back to pulling up threads from the last episode on the K.G.B. F.S.B. presence in modern-day America. We're going to start a few economic points. We're actually going to a history lesson today and then going through a few bits and pieces, but you really do got to watch the whole series, like starting the beginning. You know, if you missed a previous episode, you're not going to be able to make sense out of this episode. And I do keep up with current events, so I really am like integrating things together, past research, events, experiences I've had, investigations I've been through, just my life experience. So the big thing is that the Federal Reserve released information, I think it was today, literally, that they're not going to be changing interest rates. So they'll remain unchanged. And whether that's actually just what's happening or what they decide on, I'm not even going to get into researching. But that's not regular news, and it might be really good news for a lot of people, just based on where the economy's at. So interest rates will not be changing. And the CEO of J.P. Morgan Chase, Jamie, hold on a second, I want to make sure I get his name right. I don't want to get that wrong. But it's the CEO of J.P. Morgan Chase. He just put something out today. Jamie Dimon, D-I-M-O-N, was on a panel and stated that he thought that the settlements around Epstein and the abuse related to him have not been correct. I would agree. So we're going to do a little history lesson, and we're going to start the history lesson as soon as I go through a couple other current events so that everything makes sense to you and it really flows together. And as I said, you know, this is a show for people who like to take notes and create their own charts and everything else. And obviously you must like music and watching me dance because I do that too. So anyways, here's the thing. So Trump has gone through a second indictment, and then, you know, his sort of usual flourish, went through what was basically an arrest and then was released and then went to have an event with supporters down in Florida at a Cuban restaurant, which is weird. His daughter then released a family photo without him after leaving, or is even just avoiding the state of Florida altogether while he's going through this. Biden is now in trouble to the tune of $5 million for taking a payment. And this is all coming up at the same time that the 702 Surveillance Act is up for renewal. Don't renew that. That's the FISA Act that allowed people to literally just go in and like fill out a couple of forms and get an automatic tap on people. And it wasn't necessarily being used. It's supposed to be used to tap individuals abroad that are dangerous to federal security. But what was happening, so we'll just go straight to security. Well, let's go to a security lesson for the 2000s. One of the problems in the 2000s was that it was being used, especially in relationship to National Patriot Act, right? The Patriot Act problems. It was being used to actually stalk and surveil people who were U.S. citizens, not to help them, but in some cases to allow people that were actually assets working in the federal government, working with people in Hollywood that were related to the Russian mafia, to then harass and stalk U.S. citizens here. So in other words, people who were actually working for the F.S.B. and part of the Russian mafia and tied back to Kansas City were actually using it to extort ideas and work from U.S. citizens for free under the threats of surveillance and saying that the person was guilty of espionage, which is actually reversed. They were being forced to work for free in all kinds of different venues and ways. And then that material was being used for running Russian operations here in the U.S. and money. So that's why you can't renew that Surveillance Act. That's real easy. Real easy. We're not doing that again. And with the way the laws have changed, the idea that somebody would try to use that again, just ridiculous. Buffalo Bill, the guy that I've also called Keith, that has broken into the CIA and operates under two different aliases in both the Republican and Democratic Party, notably used at the NSA to put wiretaps on people's phones, especially women in the D.C. area, so that he could then demand free material from them and steal. Oh, yes. It was used for stealing material for entertainers who were tied back to the Russian government and the Russian mafia. Some of whom are still operating as performers in the U.S. today, although they're having a much harder time getting material. And we are definitely not going to be going back to any renewals of that so that those said entertainers can get free material to use for their Russian operations. That's what they're doing in the U.S. So again, the issue isn't really the Russian military. It's all this other weird mumbo-jumbo-y stuff where people are just, being stolen from and not being allowed to work. And, look at me. I went through a long extortion scheme. That's why I was able to be carried out, because there were assets in the U.S. government that were actually misusing that act. And that's why so many people have complained about the Patriot Act and some of the other surveillance acts, because they're not being used to go after the actual people that they're supposed to go after. They've manipulated and used to harass a lot of women, frankly. So a lot of just regular women who wanted to have jobs and work their lives, or men and people, with creative products. So if you're wondering how that was happening, that's why. And while a number of these people have been fired, a lot of them are still free in the U.S. Because, let's see, Keith, Patricia, who's the other guy that I gave a nickname to, that's been into this stuff. There's another woman I call Swiss Miss. She went to Luther College. She's actually a Russian-American woman, but she was in Iowa. She was part of these big setups. So, yeah, she was real nasty. That's the one that attacked Ashley Judd. Yeah, I decided to give her a nickname because I've had it. Like, if you guys aren't going to do your jobs and put some of these people away, take out a commission, then I'm going to start to put some material up about it. Give them nicknames. On top of whatever aliases they're using. So, anyways, that would be, so you got Patricia, the Swiss Miss, we call him Buffalo Bill, also known as Keith. What other nicknames did we go through here? Oh, we have Miguel, who is from Kansas City and got himself a job in the military and was getting women set up trafficked. And we got, I'm just looking for another name here. Because, I got to keep my aliases straight, too. Oh, and we got Dan. I gave him the nickname Dan. And no, that is not the name of a person that I actually would know. I'm giving the name Dan to this person literally because it's not actually anywhere near the alias that he's been using or one of the two he's been using. So, just to make it really fun for everyone. And, Anyway, so here's the thing. Gosh. Okay, I'm going to break down this thing on Biden with the money from the Ukraine. That came from a power company. But the power company is actually based in Cyprus, which is a former British colony. So when you talk about Cyprus, you're talking about a place that did not want to be part of England or MI6, that deliberately revolted and moved out, and has been known to have Russian activity there, or at least has been hospitable to them. And that's where the company that actually gave the payout to Biden's family came from, because you can't say it necessarily was Biden, right? So that's a problem because the company is based in the Ukraine as well, in Kiev. Now, why is that an issue? It's an issue because the main thing that the Russians like to mess around with is energy and sewage. So when you get a situation where there's been a payout made and the company's actually based in Kiev, but then it's not because it's actually really founded in Cyprus, which is a place that's hospitable to Russia, and Russia's trying to ruin everything in Ukraine, and then Biden's taking a payout. That's not good. That's really not good. And I know a lot of people hate that sort of like look at this and look at that thing, but with Ukraine, a lot of what you're dealing with is that the Russians keep messing around with it and try to be manipulative, and they've definitely tried to take over Kiev many, many times, and also the eastern part of the country, so if not the whole country again. And it was once part of the U.S.S.R., but it broke off like all the other countries that are former U.S.S.R. And as a number of people point out, the past 10 years, Russia very clearly keeps trying to set up another U.S.S.R. They're not very successful at it because of the weakness of their military as far as their military strategy. And it's never really going to get better. Nobody really wants to help them get better. You want to find out if somebody's too sympathetic to the Russians. Start talking about how bad the military is, but don't talk about it in a really mean way. Be like, that's really sad. Like, I made the mistake of saying that the Kursk was a really sad situation with a bunch of Russian men, trying to serve the government and dying as a Marine back when I was in college. One of my professors got really angry about it. And I just said, well, it's sad. They did either following the orders of the government and they died underground in the water, after a number of days. And the reaction was just so obvious that the guy was in Russian intel because he got too angry about it. Nothing wrong with saying you feel sorry for citizens trying to follow the orders of a government that sucks. It's normal to have some kind of sympathy for people. What you can't do is have an over amount of empathy, right? You can't have an overt amount or an overly large amount of empathy. That'll get you killed. Don't do it. So, what was the name of this Ukrainian company? I gotta look it back up again. What is the name of this company? It's I'm just looking here. Oh, I spent all that time researching where the place was actually founded and didn't bother to actually look up the name again. Here it is, because I didn't. Let's see. And I wouldn't say this is even a conspiracy theory. It's pretty clearly could have been a setup on him. What is the name of this energy company? Oh, where is it? Sorry, I don't want to take up too much of your time looking for the name of this company. But, let's see. That's a pretty classic case where he would have been Burisma. Burisma. So. Jeez. So when we talk about what's going on politically, it's really going to be tempting for people to be like, not even looking at economics or geopolitical issues and just start going, well, I'm on the Democrats, I'm the Republicans, in it. Forget it. Because the stuff with Trump and Biden is like down here, and what we're talking about is like up here. Because most of these guys are in trouble for this stuff. Got it? And Trump's apparently decided to keep his own filing cabinets and hoard information since the 80s, apparently. Because source I talked to, and this was many years ago, she said that he had it all. And I ended up telling the U.S. government that a long time ago, unfortunately, so please don't get mad at me, because my argument was that he couldn't trust the U.S. government because of the existence of Patricia, Dan, Buffalo Bill, the Swiss Miss, and all these people had government jobs. And were seemingly free to go around just killing people or doing whatever they want in the D.C. area. And there were problems with the woman that I had also talked about who was eventually put in prison, but she's back out, who apparently had got herself so far up that she was at the DIA and the FBI, and she was actually breaking the systems and attacking people. Or the Russian government. By the way, I want to tell you a secret. You'll know somebody is with the F.S.B. It's called the K.G.B, working for the Russian government, especially in the D.C. area. If they freak out after you tell them something, and say, well, I'm going to have to go do blah, blah, blah to you. I have to go do this now. No, they don't. They don't have to do anything to you. That's a sign of brainwashing and being part of some weird military organization. But I can't think of any other country in the world or any other military organization that talks that way in English. I don't speak Russian. I just figured out how some of these people talk. You know, because there are people who say, well, I have to go this because you said that. And it's like a piece of really basic information everybody knows. And, you know, there became this common phrase when I was living in the D.C. area, especially among the other women and myself, that we say, be careful. Be very careful. Because you don't always know who people are. And somebody could look like another person, but it could be the same person that you've identified in the past as a dangerous operative. So you have to be careful. And be careful about what you talk about in person with people and contacts. And that's why, you know, there's no room for questions really about the series outside the series, okay? So, gotta watch the series for answers, or maybe never get them if you don't like them. Because one other issue that was the constant was people trying to re-record, you know, operatives working at these agencies trying to record over testimony and information. And I don't know that it ever got resolved. So that's another reason there just doesn't seem to be a point in reading that Surveillance Act, because it didn't work very well. Did it? Now, here's the other thing. Let's go through the history of the K.G.B. a little bit and some of their issues in the U.S. Because this was something I actually had fun teaching people about. So, by the way, Jean Pierre, she was the White House press secretary, got in trouble for violating the Hatch Act because she was making statements that would have affected the results of the upcoming election. That was a mistake. They said she's not going to be fired for it. I'm not really sure why. Too many people lost their jobs over the Hatch Act. But there's a lot of people that do that like once, and they just get like a slap on the hand. So, you know, it's like 2 or 3 times you're out type situation. But there's definitely a strike rule on that for sure, like baseball. So, anyways, here's the thing. Some of the situations I dealt with, so with K.G.B. culture, I've often heard people describe socially that they were sick of the sort of tyranny of white men. Well, what kind of white men? And the tyranny of like white people. Well, what kind of white people? Because there's a lot of white people in this country that are poor and aren't really having very good lives, that have struggled, and they're stealing from everyone and being bad and immoral. And they're really proud to be, you know, upstanding, fine citizens. And what I finally pointed out to a lot of them is the people that talk about weren't really white at all. They were Russians. And people don't realize how much the K.G.B. ran this country because they were part of the founding of the F.B.I., the CIA, the U.S.A. So the part of the problem sort of with those agencies is that they've had components to them that were built around the K.G.B. and F.S.B. and it was a flaw in their founding, but it's a very real issue that they were too similar, which meant that the Russians could understand them too easily. And there's been more problems with assets getting jobs in those agencies because of their structure as a result of it and being able to blend in more easily. You don't want an agency that makes it easy for Russians, assets, and people in the FSB and KGB to blend in and to have access to regular citizens to just beat and torture because they want to beat them up or steal from them, which is what's been going on. So the agencies themselves were not necessarily full of people who weren't patriots. They were full of people who were, but they had too many moles. And they were structurally set up, unfortunately, in such ways that they were make it more palatable for people who are moles to be part of them. So that's a problem, especially Russians. And why would you want those agencies to even be so focused on Russia? You don't. There were too many people in them who were Russian who were claiming everything had to be done, everything had to be given over to keep the Russians from being upset simply because people were worried about how they might react. Why would you worry that much when there's so many other countries that are more important and more powerful and nuclear? So, now here's the thing about KGB culture also. In the FSB, they're very big on marriages. And it's kind of a prank because what I noticed with them is there's a lot of switching around. You know, they get people married and unmarried, and then they have like affairs. And then there's a lot of manipulation of the people who are involved. And especially if you're not Russian, there's a lot of racism there. Trust me, I went through this because I was told I was supposed to be married to this guy. And there was all this weird racist response towards it because I'm not Russian. And I'm actually Arab. And I'm a specific subgroup of Arab because I'm Lebanese. And unfortunately also Jewish, which apparently makes me, I should make a big deal out of it. Crazy. Stop that. And, it was the kind of thing that in my 30s people used to laugh about. I mean, I had friends that we all just started laughing. It's like, marriage? Why are you so obsessed with marriage? And the one guy I dealt with, who I referred to him because I know he's on his second marriage now, but he'd bizarrely proposed being married to me after his second marriage failed. I think he's still trying to push the government so he can come back and be married to me as his third wife. Whatever, guys. I know I just saw him down in Charlottesville. He's clearly not happy in his second marriage, but I just wanted to stay out of things, I don't like being involved with anything that has any kind of appearance of that sort of, if it's just about switcherooing and weird stuff. Just, ugh. It's too stressful. And it's also laughable in the modern era. The thing about the K.G.B, F.S.B that's kind of hilarious is that they make such a big deal about this stuff and it just looks ridiculous. Boomers fall for it or are part of it much of the time. A lot of boomers that have money are actually part of the F.S.B, K.G.B. Go figure. Other generations are not. And the way they live their lives is not like that lifestyle. So, and you can start to spot it. This idea that the country clubs and all these other places were these horrible places of racism. No, honey, that's K.G.B, F.S.B. And just so you know, there was a time in this country before the 80s where you could go out in your uniforms for them. You could go to someone's funeral or marriage ceremony in them, and people would consider it respectable. People don't realize that about the U.S., that we actually went through that as a country. That this foreign country's, weird cult-like organization that supported their military was allowed to have had more status than our military. It's horrible. But I collected all this information through years of research and talking to sources. So just remember that, like in the modern era, how much has really changed. And so all these ideas about, the mistress, and all this, just whatever. And I say that because what I went through this year was pretty bad. I had one situation where the guy I had talked about wanting to marry me later, or having me be a third wife, literally had me ordered to come downtown to see him. And there was all these people there and lawyers, and it was like, what am I being put through? Like, why am I not allowed to live my life? And there was a lot of people who got involved simply for civil rights reasons. And I've never gotten restitution for any of this. That's something else we're going to discuss, because there was a long phase in this country where the Russians would engage in bizarre setups for lawsuits. And then sometimes evidence was even taken by from a person or by a person, like somebody like me would take it from me and use it to support the claims of a Russian person who hadn't been through the event at all. Then they'd file a lawsuit and get a bunch of money for it. And it was a way of transporting money back and forth between Russians, essentially, and protecting their finances. And then you look at people like I should have had a right to a settlement after this extortion scheme, but apparently I don't. And apparently it's because the money is all their weird mumbo jumbo-y stuff, and which would mean like Russia owes me money. Like, I'm sorry, I think you've got a little bit of a problem with the U.S. government and their administration and their employees and getting control of that and the way some of these private businesses are behaving. Just so you know. What a ridiculous set of events. And people claiming, like Buffalo Bill was briefly, I think, at the CIA, claiming he was doing investigations and he was just calling women in and beating them up and demanding that they provide him with favors, and then really coming to the point of very close to killing people and saying it's because he thought they had romantic relationships, and that wasn't it at all. And just craziness. It's bizarre craziness nobody wants to deal with. So, that's why I say the best thing that happened to me was getting involved with some of these women's groups and not women's groups like the ones that want to march around and wear hats and scream and yell at everybody, because I don't really trust those, but like actual people that were interested in human beings living decent lives and being happy. And, literally just living your life, not being branded. Because Buffalo Bill is one of the guys like to break into the NSA systems and have women branded. He was doing it again in Charlottesville this year and last year. So, yeah, that's enough of that. Apparently, Russia's Medvedev. I think that's enough of a history lesson today in the K.G.B. I just want you to understand that when people look back and I talk about some of these historical issues and talk about the development of, they talk about what was the established society in the 1950s and 60s that they criticized, that was actually very much K.G.B culture. They really were running things and really running the agencies. And there's even a church I know of that I had long theorized because I grew up in it, and it turned out to be way too Russian. And I finally said before I left the DC area, I told the government, I said, I think this church maybe never really existed because it's a Russian church and I don't believe in the history of it. Well, I researched the history of it long enough to realize that the church had actually split because of issues with slavery, and then there had been a supposed reuniting of the two parts. Well, they didn't. They didn't actually reunite. So there's this other church that developed that was supposedly this big church, and it's really not. And it turned out to be just full of Russians and Russian activity. And it's a cult, and I got out of it. I actually joined another church in Arlington back during the 2008, 2009 phase of my life. I was actually baptized into a non-denominational church, and I don't think I bothered to be not baptized into another one yet. But the fact that I left the cult like that way, and I had to leave it secretly. And there was a lot of people in the DC area that were doing the same thing to get away from some of these groups that had been set up that were fake, that were actually just part of Russian or other weird intel groups that were just cult-like and dangerous. So the best thing I ever did was literally getting that baptism done. I hate to tell you that because it seems religious, but it had to do with technicalities of life and the way that the Russians manipulate some of the culture and institutions. Point being, that church, technically the two parts, still exist in the U.S. that had split, and many never actually joined the reunification because they knew it was just a Russian org. Then other people have split from that church to create another denomination. In the end, I decided to give up on any branch of it because I knew that it had split too many times over the issues around slavery. And it is slavery, and it is a problem in the Russian culture. So just watch that. Whew. Now, I think we've actually gone through enough today, but I'm going to go through one last thing, which that Russia's Medvedev is now claiming that they have a plan to disrupt underwater communications. I know some of you are aware of what that is. They're talking about the pipelines used for communications as part of, because you have to have actual, piping. It has to go through the ocean floor. It's really deep. It takes a long time to put together. That's essentially threatening terrorism. The Nord Stream 2 was disrupted. That's because of Russian activity, and that was just a general attack on a gas pipeline project. So it's back power issues. So they're really big on disrupting communications, energy, and sewage. Got it? So, I think I'm going to end today because this feels like enough of a topic, a way long enough show for anybody. And I'm going to end with a really funny song for the situation. I'm going to do Eminem's Lose Yourself. Unless you can think of another song that would be fun to sing about. So, but sing about. Just kidding. I'm going to water my mouth a little bit before I do. I think I might go to rapping, so I'm mostly going to speak it. Like a motivational speech. Look, if you had one shot or one opportunity to seize everything you ever wanted in one moment, would you capture it or just let it slip? His palms are sweaty, knees weak, arms are heavy. There's vomit on his sweater already, mom's spaghetti. He's nervous, but on the surface he looks calm and ready to drop bombs, but he keeps on forgetting. What he wrote down, the whole crowd goes so loud. He opens his mouth, but the words won't come out. And he's choking how everybody's joking now. The clock's run out, time's up, over, below. Step back to reality, up there goes gravity, up there goes rabbit. He choked. He's so mad, but he won't give up that easy, no. He won't have it, he knows. His whole back's to these ropes. It don't matter, he's dope, he knows that, but he's broke. He's so stagnant, he knows when he goes back to this mobile home that when it's back to the lab again, yo, this whole rap. So you better go capture this moment and hope it don't pass him. You better lose yourself in the music the moment. You own it, you better never let it go. You only get one shot, do not miss the chance to blow. This opportunity comes once in a lifetime. You better lose yourself in the music the moment. You own it, you better never let it go. You only get one shot, do not miss your chance to blow. This opportunity comes once in a lifetime. You better. His soul's escaping from this hole that is gaping. This world is mine for the taking. Make me a king as we move toward our new world order. Our normal life is boring, but superstardom's close to post-war. It only grows harder, only grows hotter. He knows it's all over. These hoes is all on him. Coast to coast shows he's known as the Globetrotter. Lonely roads, God only knows he's grown farther from home. He's no father, he goes home. He barely knows his own daughter. You hold your nose to steer goes the cold water. These hoes don't want him no more. He's cold. They moved on to the next schmo flows. He knows dove and sold nada. So the soap opera as told unfolds. I suppose it's so ponder, but the beat goes on. Dum dum dum. You don't lose yourself in the music at the moment. You own it, but you better never let it go. You only get one shot to miss your chance to blow. This opportunity comes once in a lifetime. You better lose yourself in the music the moment. You better own it. You better never let it go. You only get one shot. Do not miss your chance to blow. This opportunity comes once in a lifetime, and you better. No more games. I'm gonna change what you call rage. Tear this roof off like Two Dogs Cage. I was playing in the beginning, the mood all changed. I've been chewed up and spit out and booed off stage. But I kept rhyming and stepped right to the next cipher. Best believe somebody's paying the Pied Piper. All the pain inside amplified by the fact that I can't get by with my 9 to 5 and I can't provide the right type of life for my family because, man, these guys, food stamps, they're buy diapers. And it's no movie, there's no Pied Piper. This is my life and these times are so hard. And it's getting even harder trying to feed and water my seed plus teeter between being a father and a prima donna. Baby mama drama, screaming at her too much. For me to want to stay in one spot another day of monotony's got me to the point I'm like a snail. I've got to formulate a plot or end up in jail or shot. Sucks is only my opinion. There's not. Mom, I love you, but this trailer's got to go. I cannot go old in the same plot. So here I go, is my shot. Keep failing me not, so maybe the only opportunity that I got. So to lose yourself in the music the moment you own it, you better never let it go. You only got one shot to not miss your top and really blow. Comes once in a lifetime. You better lose yourself in the music the moment you own it, you better never let it go. You only get one shot, do not miss your chance to blow. This opportunity comes once in a lifetime. You better. You better. And that is all for today's edition of The Thought Project, just so you know.